day, everyone. My name, of course, is John V. Korstein. I'm Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center here at the Mariners Museum and Park. And today I'm going to tell one of my favorite stories. Of course, I wrote a book about it, which is called Old Point Comfort Resort, and because it's a fascinating story. And it is actually, as they said, where Venus and Mars collide. And so there we go. This is, of course, promoting the Chamberlain right when it opens up. You see the naval officer and the Army officer, and then this lovely young lady. I have to tell you that Old Point Comfort Resort was a complete resort. If you know where the Hampton golf course is outside of Phoebus, that was owned by the Chamberlain. They actually owned the first golf course supposedly built in Virginia. Actually, Woodrow Wilson played there. He stayed at the Chamberlain. So we have several presidents that are associated with the Old Point Comfort Resort. And the idea, what they were promoting is, oh, bring your lovely daughter down here and you can get her hitched to some Army or Navy officer. That's implied in this picture. Now, I have to tell you that this shows Hampton Roads. It also shows some railroads. What made Hampton Roads so successful as a resort area is because of its transportation connections. The first connection was actually a steamer called the Norfolk that plied between Norfolk and Baltimore, Maryland. And so we'll tell a little story about that. But you can see by this map how conveniently the Old Point Comfort is located. It is facing right out the Virginia Capes, ergo why it was such a popular summer resort and a health resort is because of those breezes that come all the way off the Atlantic Ocean straight at Old Point Comfort. I was actually a lifeguard on Fort Monroe for 7 summers, and so there is a breeze, believe it or not, most of the time. So anyway, this is even a better map, and it shows actually the ways you could get to Virginia Beach, Ocean View. Virginia Beach is a latecomer to the resort system in Hampton Roads. Ocean View is built in the 1850s or started in the 1850s, but the real place that dominated tourism, health tourism, resort tourism is, of course, Old Point Comfort. And so what we know is that in February of 1822, the Hygeia Hotel will open. It was built by William Armistead, who was a design engineer, civilian on Fort Monroe. He got permission from the Army, and with his partner, man known as Marshall Parks. Marshall Parks is the guy that was actually design engineer of the Dismal Swamp Canal. He also owned the Hotel Drummond, which is right there on the Dismal Swamp, Drummond, Lake Drummond. And so it was a tourism oriented thing. He also owned the Nansman Hotel in downtown Norfolk, and another one that was built a little later at Ocean View. So these guys know what they're doing. They actually go to the Army, says, oh, we got so many construction workers and everything, so we need to build a hotel to accommodate them. Well, when they named it Hygeia Hotel, that kind of slipped the secret out, because Hygeia is the Greek goddess of health. So their implication is that this hotel is a health resort. And actually, the center building, you can see in this picture, was, of course, built, and it had, when it opened, just 8 rooms for people to stay, but very quickly it expanded because it became an extremely popular place. I have to say that that because of Fort Monroe and because of the huge wharf that's going to be there at Old Point Comfort, we're going to see that all sorts of people are going to start coming. In fact, the first noted guest was Henry Clay, who left Norfolk. He was then Speaker of the House, 1822, in a terrible snowstorm and what they called thick weather. I don't know if you all know this, but Henry Clay was kind of liked his glass, as they would say, and he also was a big time gambler. He was actually gambling when the Norfolk decided it couldn't make it up the bay, so it put into Old Point Comfort there at the Engineers Wharf, which you can go see today, and he actually kept playing as they went into the Hygeia. So they did that, and so that was kind of fun. But the real first noted person to stay in this resort area would be Andrew Jackson, President of the United States. He will actually spend 5 summers in Old Point Comfort. Actually, in the middle of the harbor, it's called Fort Monroe. And Fort Monroe, of course, Fort Wool. And back in 1829, it was actually called Castle Calhoun or Fort Calhoun. And so basically, Calhoun was the vice president to Jackson, and they broke over tariffs and nullification acts and so forth. So I guess maybe it was a dig, but it was a beautiful place. Marshall Parks, then manager, he would have to row out to Fort Wool. There's quarters for officers there and enlisted men. Andrew Jackson takes over the whole thing. Parks will bring breakfast and dinner out for Andrew Jackson. I think he will stay there actually 5 summers, and he actually really enjoyed it. He would take this time to actually go over to Gosport Navy Yard, because at this time the yard is expanding. It will unveil during Jackson's time in Hampton Roads. They will unveil the Portsmouth Naval Hospital. They will also unveil the new granite dry dock, diving bell. He sees all this. He attends parades and so forth at Fort Monroe. He was a real person that tried to be a man of the people, right? So actually, Andrew Jackson, purportedly every night he goes for a swim, all natural. If you think about being in Hampton Roads in August and September, which is usually when he stayed anywhere from 3 to 7 months or 7 weeks. Actually went swimming all natural in Hampton Roads. As you know, in September, they're jellyfish. So I think that may be where he gets the nickname Old Hickory. So anyway, I had to throw that one out. One person said that they were late coming to a parade. Parks had a boat with 100 spectators and Andrew Jackson. They were cruelly disappointed. The review was over 2 hours before they arrived, and the target could not be adjusted in the desired position in consequence of a strong breeze and high swell. But they saw the president, partook of the good cheer of the Hygeia, and came home tolerably reconciled. So, in essence, these Fort Monroe was its own draw in many, many ways. So basically, we have Andrew Jackson there. Actually, the Old Bay Line was the main way to get to Old Point Comfort. The Old Bay Line served various ports on the Chesapeake Bay between Baltimore and Washington and Norfolk. So that is one of the great secrets of the success of Old Point Comfort, is that they had all these ways to get to Old Point Comfort. And so that meant the Hygeia would greatly expand. In fact, one viewer who was coming on the Old Bay Line ship called the Georgia, the first gray streaks of approaching dawn found her skirting a fleet of fishermen in sailing canoes outward bound for the day's work on York Spit Shoals. She plowed steadily onward to meet the short, choppy seas washing over the horseshoe. And as the ebb tide ran counter to the gentle southwestern sweep of the land, soon she rounded Thimble Shoals and made way westward towards the mouth of Hampton Roads. The dock at Old Point Comfort, lying below the guns of the recently completed Fortress Monroe, awaited, and already some sleepy-eyed passengers who were getting off to stay at the Hygeia Hotel for the bathing season at the new resort about on deck. Well, by this time, actually, the Hygeia had over 120 rooms, and so it was become very, very popular. The dining was outstanding. I have to tell you that Marshall Parks sold his interests in the Hygeia to a man known as John Moody, who also bought the section of Elizabeth City County, Hampton, known as the Fishery and the Beach. Now, basically, the beach is Buckroe Beach. So, they're already recognizing and expanding. Now, he will, before he can do anything really with the Hygeia, he will sell it to actually Caleb Willard in partnership with John Eggleston Seeger. Seeger was a member of the Virginia Senate. Caleb Willard owned the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C. So they both are major investors. I don't know exactly how this transfer took place. I tried to look at the deeds because I think Seeger owned the mortgage for Moody and his partner French to actually to expand the Hygeia. And they had to expand the Hygeia because in 1836, after the Black Hawk War, a young officer known as Lieutenant Jefferson Finney Davis will bring the Lions of the West, Black Hawk and several of his chieftains, to Old Point Comfort after being at Washington for imprisonment. It was a very open imprisonment. They walked around. The idea was to show Black Hawk and other Native Americans that this is the power of the federal government. Look at this huge fort. Could you build this? No, we can. Anyway, that brought all sorts of visitors to Old Point Comfort. And in fact, one of my favorite visitors, well, let me just say this one quote. At Old Point, there's a splendid hotel kept in excellent style. The tables during the summer months are plentifully supplied with the choicest viands, among which may be named the best of fish and oysters, which with the superior facilities for sea bathing and delightful ocean breezes, the novelties and attractions connected with the fort, the convenient distance to Norfolk, Richmond, Washington, Baltimore, etc., unite to concentrate a large number of visitors there during the summer season in search of pleasure for the purpose of recruiting impaired health. Detached from the building are extensive billiard saloons, bowling alleys, pistol galleries for exercise and amusements, and commodious bathing houses. The groves of tree in front and rear of the house afford an abundance of shade. Those are the live oaks, which are very popular and widespread on Fort Monroe. And you can be there today. And so actually, this man, Edgar Allan Poe, will actually come to Old Point Comfort. But before he comes, it's going to be John Tyler, who as president, his wife will die, and he will go to Old Point Comfort to mourn his wife out on what now is known as Fort Wool. He then actually every evening he went to the Hygeia to actually have his dinner. He used that bowling alley. This would have been duck pin bowling, a smaller ball, more pins. So basically, he was the talk of the town. The commander of the fort actually would bowl with Tyler, have Tyler over at Old Quarters #1 for meals and so forth. It was a pleasant, he recovered. He recovered so well that in 1844, he is going to marry the woman next to Tyler in this picture, and that is Julia Gardner Tyler. He meets her when the great explosion of a 13-inch gun on the deck of the Princeton occurred. Actually, John Erickson, who we know all about here at the Mariners Museum, designer of the Monitor, actually had designed that ship, its engine system, all the guns except for one that was done by John Stockton, which Erickson said that's going to blow up. It did. Now, when it blew up, Julia Gardner's father died. Right. And she had been down below with Tyler on a special tour of the captain's cabin. And when they heard the explosion, they came on deck. She fainted into Tyler's arms. And when she awoke, he reminded her of her father, and they got married. So I don't know what that says, but nevertheless, they had this great reception when they got married in August of 1844, and they will have that at the Hygeia Hotel. Actually, a hurricane comes by, and it was amazing just how much they drank. Supposedly they had over 1,500 bottles of champagne alone. So this was a party time. And so anyway, he will then, of course, this hurricane comes. Mrs. Tyler loses her pet canary. And so all the staff's running around. Here's this terrible storm trying to catch the canary. You can just imagine it was a far worse storm than we had yesterday. So actually, the next, I think, significant person to stay is this man, Edgar Allan Poe. And as many of you all know, Edgar Allan Poe had basically served on Fort Monroe as a artillery sergeant. A man named Lieutenant Howard will recognize him because Poe had enlisted as E.A. Perry. And so basically, Lieutenant Howard, Joshua Howard, a West Point graduate, says, "You are Edgar Allan Poe. You shouldn't be a sergeant. You're brilliant. I'm going to get you into West Point." So he goes to West Point. Now, this is after he joined the Army, after he spent 1 year at University of Virginia. He's there with the first class, and he takes the course known as gambling and drinking. And so he drops out. He has $2,000 in debts, and his foster father says, "I'm not paying those." And so he publishes a small book of poetry and then joins the Army. He goes to West Point, and he follows the same path, gambling and drinking. And so he leaves West Point after 9 months of 7 months of studies. And so, but he comes back because he is trying to raise money on the lecture circuit because he wants to start his own magazine. He's a noted critic. He's a noted essayist, noted short story writer. In fact, some people say he invented the short story. He also was a brilliant poet. And so basically he would give lectures. And so he gave a big lecture in Norfolk and then came over to stay at the Hygeia, where after dinner he will basically give all sorts of wonderful recitations of his poetry. Purportedly, he finished the poem Annabel Lee and recited it that night. And the last stanza goes, "For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee." and the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. If you've been on Fort Monroe, you can just picture that concept that Poe is sharing. So actually, Poe will be dead in, I think, 3 weeks after he's at the Hygeia. So we don't know for sure. But anyway, so they keep, thanks to Joseph Seeger, who owned a property known as Roseland, which is where the old Roseland, we called it Strawberry Banks, that great brick structure that's going to be built by another man. Seeger's house at that time was actually over in Phoebus at Strawberry Banks, and he grew peaches, he grew apples, he grew all the vegetables that you had at the Hygeia. Of course, you had, the finest foods, seafood. See, it was fresh. We had no way of refrigerating the stuff. So, it was just excellent, and people enjoyed it so much. One person wrote, "Have you ever been to Old Point Comfort? If you have, 'tis needless for me to attempt to describe that spacious saloon, with corridors on each side, large enough to contain with ease at least 500. And they would enter a west door from the piazza, and no garden ever gleamed more brightly, with clustering flowers and mirrors reflecting an extensive range, making it look larger and better filled. For health, no mountain retreat can be safer at any season of the year. It is exempt from disease in August, September, and October, as in April, May, or June. Indeed, the first 3 are infinitely the most pleasant of the season. The weather is milder, the sea breeze balmier, and the luxuries of the salt water are to be had of finer quality and greater profusion. There is no more inviting spot on the whole Atlantic seaboard. It is strictly of it what the poet hath said, oh, if there be a Elysium on earth, this is it. This is it. That's from Poe. Basically, what Seeger does is, in essence, he will expand the hotel to as it looks in this print. This print basically is showing the Adelaide, which is the steamboat down in the left corner. That is an old Bay Line steamer. And so actually in 1860, this place is really a success. 5,000 visitors stay at the Hygeia in 1858. They're always trying to enhance visitation. So in 1860, the largest ship ever built up to that time, 679 feet in length, the Great Eastern, paddle wheels, sails, and screw propellers. So this thing wanted to go. And so basically the good old Joseph Seeger baits the Great Eastern to stay off of Old Point Comfort, and with all the coal the ship needed to operate on the Chesapeake Bay. So when the Great Eastern comes, and it's a huge ship. I can't. The next largest ship is half its size. You won't have a ship that big until they build the Lusitania, just to let you know. So basically, the Hygeia will welcome on August 5th 10,000 visitors alone. And they all want to go on the Great Eastern. You pass through, as you can see in this picture, the great porch of the Hygeia, and they had a buffet set out basically on August 3rd, August 5th. It was reported that they fed 10,000 people each day. So, that's called promotions. However, the war is going to come. The Civil War, we all know about that conflict. And so this shows the Hygeia in During the Peninsula Campaign, the Army took over part of it for use as a hospital. Actually, when the 1st Vermont Regiment, commanded by Colonel John Wilcox Phelps, a graduate of 1836 at West Point, he shows up with the 1st Vermont, and boom, they march into the Hygeia and they take it over on May 14th, 1861. They didn't pay any rent. So basically, now the lease of the land with the Hygeia specified in time of war, the War Department could actually say, we're going to tear you down. And if you're in the way of military operations. So Phelps will take his unit out to what's now known as Phoebus, at that time was Camp Hamilton. And so this is the traffic and everything during the Peninsula Campaign. Wool is going to write Edwin Stanton saying that the Hygeia was not all that good on a military post because it was home to spies, gamblers, whiskey salesmen, and women of questionable quality. All the enlisted men loved it, but nevertheless, they will tear it down in December of 1862. And it will eventually be replaced at what is a new wharf. And a new wharf is built on Old Point Comfort. If you come in Ingalls Road and comes past the Chamberlain, it dead ends on the water. That's where the largest wharf on the Chesapeake Bay was built, and that wharf was called the Government Wharf, also known as the Baltimore Wharf, because of the steamships coming from Baltimore. So you've got to realize that the Hygeia, Joseph Seeger sold his interest to Caleb Willard. Willard will create the Hygeia Saloon. Now, that doesn't say that it's just for drinking. It's actually where you could get meals when you got off the boat. Wow, this is pretty good. Across the street from it was what was known as the Chamberlain Hotel, which had a store. William Keeler, paymaster of the Monitor, said that Mr. Kimberly was the greatest of all hosts because, good old Keeler will be on the Monitor. So anyway, this is showing the Hygeia Saloon. Now what happens after the war is over in 1868, basically Henry Clark will buy the saloon from Willard, and he builds this hotel. Look at that mansard roof. There's the wharf. You can see it's all about transportation. That's what made all these different type of resorts so popular, is that they actually had simple transportation connections. And so the Hygeia will expand, but Clark will go bankrupt. And the note is purchased by a man known as Mr. Shoemaker, who owned Adams Express, and one of his station masters at Old Point Comfort is this man, Harrison Phoebus. Born in Princess Anne, Maryland, he serves in the Union Army during the Civil War. It's the same old story. His father dies when he's 13. He has to help provide for the family. He becomes a carpenter. He also becomes a oysterman, and so he supports his family. He joins the Army, becomes a sergeant. When his enlistment is up, he then becomes a part of the Adams Express Company. That's the modern, what could I say, Federal Express, UPS, you name it. So anyway, so he's there at Old Point Comfort. When the Hygeia goes bankrupt, he works with Shoemaker to acquire it. He eventually will acquire it completely. And this man is an energetic person of the highest order. And I have to tell you, he will expand. We'll get back to him. You can see how he expands the Hygeia. It is amazing where Mars and Venus collide. That's the concept they're trying to promote. There's the young artillery officer. There's the young, probably heiress. It was the very thought. Phoebus expanded the hotel from Ingalls Road across from the Hygeia all the way down to the lighthouse. That hotel had 870 rooms, right? It also has the first hotel with bathrooms for every room. Oh my gosh, electric light for every room. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And they also promoted themselves as a health resort. And so they had all sorts of special baths, not just seawater baths, but also Nanheim baths. There was one called the Magneto electric bath. And I was thinking about that when I saw all this stuff when I was writing my book on Old Point Comfort and Resort. And wow, I thought about how would I get into an electric bath? You know, remember the James Bond movie where he throws a fan and kills somebody who was trying to kill him? I don't know how that really worked. But nevertheless, Phoebus is going to just be tremendous. The hotel is described through its windows of cathedral glass. There is a superb view enlivened by dancing sunbeams and fleeting sails, reflected by the great mirrors upon every hand. From the great tiled chimney piece, two celebrated terracotta eagles look over the assembled multitude from all over the country. He spent $300,000 on making that hotel fabulous. And it get this, why it was so successful. Now, there's going to be other hotels on Fort Monroe. Evans Cottage, which is on the other side of the lighthouse, had rooms for 50 people. The Sherwood Inn, which is near the main gate. Actually, there's a park there where the Sherwood Inn stood, 500 rooms, right? So you get the idea that Old Point Comfort is a place where you wanted to go. Some of the FFVs, First Families of Virginia, would always go to the Hygeia, like Fitzhugh Lee and others, to actually enjoy the sea breezes, the baths, the salt bathing, and etc. I mean, it was fabulous. Beyond all compare. And so what makes it a resort, ready for this, is that Phoebus will, the guy, Collis Potter Huntington, he brings his railroad down to Newport News. He builds his own resort hotel known as the Warwick Hotel, downtown Newport News, but it doesn't have the breezes at Old Point Comfort. So Phoebus and John Darling go to C.P. Huntington and says, why don't you bring your railroad to Old Point Comfort? And Collis thinks about it and realizes that they are having virtually thousands of people a month stay at the Hygeia for its season of 8 months. So basically it was a moneymaker, and such a moneymaker that good old CP will take his railroad through Hampton, which is, of course, the oyster center, crabs, all those seafood now can be shipped via the CNO to everywhere in the United. You can have fresh oysters because Huntington's engineers build the first refrigerated railroad car. So they can take those oysters. You can have fresh oysters in Cleveland if you wish. So that was really hot. And so CP Huntington, milepost 0 of the CNO Railway is on Old Point Comfort. You can see the marker today. And as you look up from the marker, 100 yards away is the Chamberlain Hotel. So Phoebus really knew what he was doing. They kind of promoted Fort Monroe as a medieval fort to enjoy. They had just every type of amenity that you could imagine. They owned a duck hunting resort on Cobb Island, one up the Chickahominy River. They had sailboats, they had excursions. It was fabulous. And as the Hygeia grew, so did the entire resort. Beyond Evans Cottage and Sherwood Inn, they also had a place called Brightview uh, cottage on what is now Phoebus, named, of course, for Harrison Phoebus. Harrison Phoebus was amazing because this is how he's described in 1882. Still a young man in his appearance, he is thick-set and fast developing into a rotundity of Falstaffian proportions. His head is well shaped, his face round and covered in a thick beard and mustache. His eyes are his best feature. They are clear, searching, and piercing. Indeed, he is such a good fellow and bears such a resemblance to certain high cards in the pack. He goes entirely by the name of King of Trumps. Yes, basically, they form a town after the Civil War, and which will be called Chesapeake City, but will be renamed Phoebus in Harrison Phoebus's honor. He's going to die of a heart attack in 1882, just as he finishes that elegant brick structure known as Strawberry Banks. So this is the second Hygeia. You can see the bathing pavilion, and at the end of that pier, that pavilion, after the hurricane of 1933, that will become the bandstand that's right across from the Chamberlain Hotel. Of course, it was rebuilt after another hurricane, but it's in the same design and size as that. So, I mean, really, he actually, Phoebus died in 1886. He is 45 years old. So we really have this tremendous hotel that is going to be beyond compare. Now, I got to tell you that what's going to happen, actually, Hygeia also owned, or Phoebus also owned, which was part of the Hygeia Hotel Corporation, the resort at White Sulphur Springs. He owns the resort at Saratoga Springs. In other words, he offers everything for everyone with this motto of good food, joyful excursions, healthy, and they say that it was a health resort because of the water they used. Actually, the Big Bethel Reservoir was created to provide water for Fort Monroe, and that was excellent water. The baths, the seawater, the breezes. It was the porch on Hygeia went 1.5 miles, as it wound itself around. And so that is amazing. I mean, you get your exercise just by going on the wharf. So people were flocking to the Hygeia, so much so that there's going to be other resorts created. Phoebus, by 1900, is going to become a noted resort because the streetcar would take you onto Old Point Comfort, where you could mix with the elites of America, acting like you were staying at the Hygeia or eventually the Chamberlain. And so that was really great. There were 8 hotels there. There were actually 2 resort hotels in the town of Hampton. And not only did Phoebus have 8 hotels, it also had 57 saloons. Okay, wow. So if you were thirsty, that's a place to go. By 1890s, actually, they will develop Buckroe Beach as a resort. You can see this is a beautiful view of the Hygeia. Buckroe Beach will be, this is, of course, the Sherwood Inn, and this is Bayshore. Now, Bayshore was the first beach resort for African Americans in the South. It becomes famous. It's right between Buckroe Beach and Old Point Comfort. It was rebuilt after the hurricane of 1933, but it was rebuilt. People like Duke Ellington played there, Count Basie's orchestra. I mean, this was an elite place to be for African Americans. Actually, Buckroe Beach became so popular with the working class that the C&O had an excursion train that came down to Phoebus, and then John Darling had built a streetcar to take people to um, Buckroe Beach that had the same gauge and steel rails as the C&O. And he was smart because they pulled a switch and that train could go right down to Buckroe Beach, dropping everyone off there, as well as Bayshore. And what did you have? You had a day and the sun and the beach, and then you hop back on the train and went back to like Richmond. And why was this so successful? Because there was no air conditioning back then. So I don't know about you all, but I lived in Richmond for a year, and I got to tell you that it gets hot in the summer, and it's not that bad on Old Point Comfort. So let's get out of the heat and the misery, the grime, and everything of the big city with its industries, and go to this healthful resort. Grand View actually had its own hotel. It had its own dance hall. So did Buckroe Beach. Dancing was very popular during this time. And so basically, it was a huge, huge success. It was said that this is the line about the baths. A complete set of baths, this is at the Hygeia, including the Turkish, Russian, thermo, electromagnetic, mercurial, sulfur, and vapor baths have been induced and combined with the celebrated hot sea baths adds another wonderful agent to the therapeutic advantages of the Hygeia, as beneficial as it is unique. Well, I have to tell you that basically the Hygeia will start to decline slowly after the death of um, Harrison Phoebus. Basically, his wife sells the interests to a corporation led by F.N. Pike. However, this man, John Chamberlain, is going to see the value of Hygeia. And so he decides, now, this guy was a riverboat gambler on the Mississippi River. This guy ran a gambling hotel in New Jersey, and he eventually owned the Senate, released the Senate dining room, which became famous for its canvasback duck, its seafood. It was like the place to eat. Now, Chamberlain had decided, well, I really want to, build this hotel because this business at Old Point Comfort, 15 to 20 steamships, right? Docked from the old Dominion line, old Bay line, the Weems line, went to Old Point Comfort. 15 to 20 steamers daily. The train came twice a day. So you can well imagine how easy it was to get there. And Chamberlain recognized that. And so he's going to build what is known as the Chamberlain Hotel. This is one of the rooms inside. I mean, gosh, he had 1,200 hotel rooms. He also had a telephone in the room. He had electricity, its own bathroom. The suites were magnificent. This shows the hugeness of the Hygeia Hotel. It is amazing beyond all imagination. And so it will basically, there's so many beautiful quotes. Every room of this big wooden labyrinth had its drowsing occupant, and sleeping or waking, there are more beauties in the corridors of the hotel or along the shaded walks within the fort than one can meet in a decade of travel. Perhaps the proximity of Fortress Monroe has not a little to do with the popularity of Old Point Comfort as a health resort. Day after day, in their dainty dresses, swarms of charming girls invade the fort, supervised by the mechanical maneuvers, and they would criticize the battery drills, demonize the stargazers, and then they would work on inspecting the guns of the fort. So it was really pretty amazing. Even around the hotel, The military air prevails. The artillery band comes in every day and plays in the saloon adjoining the great dining room. The officers off duty dine with their friends, point out historic spots in the neighborhood, and when sunset nears and the bugles blare, the signal for parade, hundreds of gaily dressed visitors stream across the moat, through the resounding postern gate, and over the green carpet of the parade, where they make a picturesque group under the grove of oak trees. And the band strikes up, and the troops march out and form a line of battle. And there's a brief quarter hour of music and martial pomp, and the officers march up in the front, saluting their commanders, are swallowed up in the throng of citizens. And then twilight comes, and an adjournment to the hotel, and an evening devoted to more music, dancing, and the artillery uniforms are evidently as much as home in the salon as on the ramparts. Oh my gosh, you can well imagine. And so the Chamberlain becomes famous for, excuse me, its kitchens, its food. It also becomes famous for just the whole sense of resort that it had. And you can see from this picture, now this was taken during World War I. The Chamberlain was taken over by the government for use as offices and officers' quarters. It will lease the building from 1917 through 1919, and then it's returned back. By the way, the first Chamberlain will open in 1896. Chamberlain himself will die 3 months later of Bright's disease. Somehow he made this happen. And so you can see there is the Chamberlain. Now, meanwhile, we have the Jamestown Exposition, which is right across over at Sewell's Point. Some of the buildings still stand from that. Actually, quarters number 1 on Fort Monroe was built in conjunction with the Jamestown Exposition. People flocked to the Chamberlain during that year-long World's Fair, so to speak. They had mock battles of the Monitor and, as they would say, Merrimack. They had this huge mural painted of the Battle of the Ironclads, which has disappeared, sadly. It was just like the place to be. Excursion boats left Old Point Comfort would wind their way through the fleet anchored in Hampton Roads, and it was a gala affair every day. Remember the Army band coming in? I mean, they would play music from the parade ground and march right into the Chamberlain and play music for the dancing, the ballroom dancing. So it was ultimately fabulous. And so you can see from this map, basically this was done during the 1907 Jamestown celebration. And actually there's this little pamphlet put out by the Chamberlain that showed John Smith. This is a map from it. See, Mappy of Oldie, Virginia today. And so it was like, this is where America was born. This is where you need to be to celebrate the grandeur, the fine food, the sea breeze of the Old Dominion. It was a huge success, I gotta say. See, they promoted, this is a different steamboat line, right? This went from Washington to Norfolk. And notice, weekend tours to Old Point Comfort. Oh my gosh, I really wanted to be there. Here is the great Baltimore Wharf. You can see the streetcar. You can see the steamboats. And this photograph is taken from the Chamberlain Hotel. So in 1919, it is going to be returned to its owners. You can just see how beautiful a building this was. However, on March 7, 1920, they're having a jewelry and fur, celebration where all these dealers from New York came down and wealthy people would come and look at all this stuff. And at 5, the gong would be rung for dinner. And as everyone was assembled near the entrance to the dining room, one of the workers came out and says, does anyone know where a fire extinguisher is? Oh my gosh. See, this is a resort. So they had their own beauty salon. Remember the electricity that you'd install way back? That electricity system was outdated by 1920. A fire started in the beauty shop and spread throughout the hotel. The hotel would burn down within 8 hours. You could see the intensity of the flames and what to do. This resort is over. In steps Mr. Darling, and he will create the Old Point Comfort Hotel Corporation, and that is really pretty amazing. They barely are able to open the hotel within the time limit set by the Army. The Army really didn't want them there, but they had this lease. But if they didn't rebuild by a certain time and have it open by a certain time, the lease would revert back to the government. So they did, with the help of the Sheridan Corporation, will build. Here you go. This is the pamphlet, Vanderbilt Corporation. And so it's called the Chamberlain Vanderbilt Hotel. Look at it. It's grand as can be. This was a complete resort. Golf course, sailing, horseback riding, tours of Fort Monroe. They promoted St. John's Church. You could even go to the Veterans Administration and see those grizzled old veterans of the Union Army from 1861 to 65 who lived there at the Soldiers' Home, as they called it. You would also be able to tour Hampton University. They noted how close they were to Jamestown, which actually they would take an excursion up there 1 day a week. So you had everything you wanted. It's just like resorts of today, slightly different, but it was outstanding. And look at this. You know, one of my good friends, Ross Carney, used to be mayor of Hampton. He remembered, he lived in Phoebus, and he got sent away to a Catholic school in Baltimore. And he remembered coming down the bay on the old Bay Line steamer. And I went on the last trip of the old Bay Line steamer between Old Point Comfort and Baltimore with my grandparents because it was kind of historic. And I said, what is this dumpy thing? Actually, I now remember it very fondly. So nevertheless, Carney would say, as you round it, York Spit, and all of a sudden the sun would come up through the capes and the sun would gleam off of all the windows of the Chamberlain and would be a beacon for him coming home and everyone else realizing they're coming to Old Point Comfort. Oh, wow. You know, that was neat. Here you see the Great Wharf. There is saltwater. They had an indoor saltwater pool as well. They basically, I forgot to tell you that Grover Cleveland stayed at the Hygeia with duck hunting over at Cobb's Island. He was a big time duck hunter, by the way. The wharf is going to be torn down after, I think, Hurricane Hazel. Because everyone says, who owns it? Does the Chamberlain own it? No, they said, no, we don't. We can't afford to fix it. Does the government own it? Well, it's not in our budget. So they tore it down instead. It was a landmark. It was really a huge business opportunity, which steamships on the bay were fading by the time of the wharfs being torn down. And basically, so were the steamers no longer effective because of cars. Actually, Old Point Comfort Resort after the World War II, after the early 1960s when they build the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. Now in your own car, despite the traffic, you could go all the way over where? to Virginia Beach, which was right on the ocean. So people started to eschew Buckroe Beach, Phoebus, and even the Chamberlain. Actually, after the end of World War II, see, during World War II, I forget half the stuff I know. And so anyway, in World War II, it is rented by the U.S. Navy. And I remember, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. was stationed there. Now, this guy was tan. Just imagine him in a white uniform. Actually, some ladies were friends of my mother in Hampton. They told me how they swooned over Douglas Fairbanks Jr. I mean, he was tall, he was elegant, he was everything. And there were all these officers, so they had tea dances at the Chamberlain and that sort of stuff. So it was a popular beyond compare. So I have to say that of course, this is one of my favorite posters, and this is the epitome of what Old Point Comfort Resort was about. And you have to realize that even though it was superseded by Virginia Beach and the Outer Banks, the Chamberlain, the second version of it, was wonderful. It stayed in operation until Hurricane Katrina, where the water kind of came in. The hotel was really fading by that time. So anyway, the Chamberlain would then be acquired and by Drucker and Falk, and they transformed it into a retirement home. Actually, I lived there, I forget how many years, and it was great. I lived in the old book and card shop section, so I had a beautiful view of the water of Fort Monroe. I kind of liked it there, and it was easy for me at that time in my life. So I have to say, the Old Point Comfort Resort was noted throughout the world for its food, its health-giving qualities. Everything about it reached out to people and gave them a comfort that you couldn't find anywhere else. Those sea breezes, the views, the places to visit, all made Old Point Comfort Resort one of the finest resorts in America. Here you go. This is the book I wrote about Old Point Comfort, and I have to say that it's a beautiful Beaux Arts rendition of Georgian architecture. It seems very simple, but there's certain really flashes to it, which you can see in this picture. Those cupolas were actually torn down during World War II because you could see them from the ocean, right? And everyone said, oh my gosh, they're a beacon for those, submarines, German submarines that were operating off the coast. Actually, you could see ships burn from the Chamberlain Hotel and elsewhere. So it was so they were torn down. Where they went, nobody knows, because they were taken off complete. That's when you look at the Chamberlain today, those are no longer there. So anyway, I could talk forever about this topic. And so everything I told you today, in fact, all the quotes are in my book on Old Point Comfort Resort. And I left out half the stuff I knew. So if you have any questions, please ask away. I also, this is my email address, and so you can actually write me questions if you wish. Of course, our gift shop here at the Mariners Museum carries many of my books, especially about ironclads, but also about Old Point Comfort Resort. So with a great huzzah, thank you all for attending today.
Thank you, John. Fabulous comments from all of you wonderful people that joined us and are enjoying all of your tales of joy and woe and war and love, all wrapped up in this wonderful lecture today. for those of you that haven't seen John's book, and for those of you that love to cook, many recipes are in the back of this Old Point Comfort book. For those of you that love to revisit fabulous cuisine that would have been served at many of the resorts on Old Point Comfort. So just an aside on that. I still wish that I live in Phoebus, and John, I think you and I would both say, don't we wish we still had the steamers that we could get around, because now the traffic.
Oh, yeah. They tried to bring that back in Hampton in the 90s, and for some odd reason it just didn't work because they couldn't accommodate cars, and so you had to go on into downtown Hampton, and so it was a nice try. I think if I had to commute from the peninsula to Virginia Beach, and I do sometimes, I give lectures at various places, and I always try to be across that tunnel by 3 o'clock, because if you ain't past it then,
Forget
it's
it.
gonna come very quickly.
Forget it.
But yeah, and so it's pretty amazing, and I have to say the whole story of the resort is one that mirrors the development of America. There was, because of industrialization, two different new groups that rose in America: the leisure class. So all these people who owned the businesses and so forth had all this income, and what do? They were able to come down to places like Old Point Comfort or go up to White Sulphur Springs and enjoy better weather, right? Because you go up the mountains, it's not as hot. You go down on the beach, it's not as hot. So, it was tremendous. And then the working class. Just imagine living in a place like Oregon Hill in Richmond. It got hot. You worked in a factory. Life was not as happy, but you could hop on that train at the Broad Street station, and your next stop was Buckroe Beach. Let's go. I remember the billboard that said, "Let's go to Buckroe."
Well, wish we had that ease of transportation today.
Yes.
We do have a question here, John. It appears that both the Hygeia and Chamberlain hotels were higher than the walled fortress behind. Did these block the view and firing angle of the cannon?
Well, when the Hygeia first was built, it was actually built between the main gate and came all the way down to the old post office. Okay, so there are no guns on the land side there. So that's why they built it there. The Sherwood Inn was built right across from the main entrance to the Hygeia, the first Hygeia. So after the war, Phoebus was able, because of his skills, to expand it, because basically coastal defense changed during the Civil War. Actually, Fort Monroe was outmoded, the cannons were outmoded, and it wasn't until the 1890s when we modernized Fort Monroe with what's called the Endicott Plan. And the Endicott Plan are those big concrete batteries. Notice where they are. They are all facing towards the capes. So they developed new types of artillery, 10 and 12-inch and 16-inch disappearing guns. In other words, they were on a cradle. When they fired, the recoil put it down into what's called the gun well, and then they could load it in relative safety, and then it goes back up. The capes are 18 miles away from Fort Monroe, and those guns could go 20 miles. So you could fire to the horizon and beyond. And at night, you can definitely see the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel if you stood on top of anywhere in Fort Monroe. I mean, it's one of those awesome views. Sometimes you can see it from your house, Julie. Julie lives on Mill Creek, which was where the water for the moat comes from for Fort Monroe. I wouldn't drink that water, but
no, don't do that.
No, don't do that. So anyway, so basically, in times of war, the Army had the right to tear down any hotel, and so they justified tearing down the Hygeia. They ordered it to be torn down 1901. However, it didn't come down until December of 1903. And that's when they started building the general officers' quarters. I lived on Fort Monroe, so it's like, wow. And so that was really good.
One visitor, John, asked if that cannon that you showed the old the officer and the young lady,
Oh, yes.
is that the big cannon that's still at Fort Monroe?
No, it is not. That gun
Okay.
is the Lincoln gun that was forged and casted, excuse me, in 1860 at Fort Pitt Arsenal. That was the first 15-inch gun. It's called a Rodman gun. It was originally called the Floyd gun for the Secretary of War, but he was a crook and he went over to the side of the Confederacy. And he's the only cabinet officer to that date that made $1 million while being a cabinet member.
Wow.
How did he do that? And he shifted all these guns to arsenals in the South. I mean, he was a crafty guy. So they changed the name to the Lincoln gun in honor of President Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
That is a smooth bore 15-inch shell gun. The gun they were looking at was actually a 150-pounder Parrott gun. You can tell by the banding near the breech. And so that was a rifled gun that was developed right before the Civil War erupted. And so it was a powerful gun, toned to bursting, sadly. In fact, one gun did burst on Fort Monroe. It was a 10-inch gun in battery Parrott, named for John Parrott, who's the inventor of the Parrott gun, right? And the breech blew off, and the breech landed very close to your house, actually. And a friend of mine has it, because they went out and recovered it and raised it and so forth. So it splashed down, it killed a bunch of people. It was the worst accident on Fort Monroe during its existence as a coastal defense fort. I have to say that to build the battery Parrott, you tore down the old, what was known as the water battery, made of granite that came from a quarry near Georgetown, Maryland. So when they tore that down, people went and got stuff. And actually, the house next behind your house, right, that beautiful Victorian,
Yeah.
I think it's actually a Queen Anne modified Victorian. All that granite came from the water battery on Fort Monroe. So yeah,
Interesting.
And my friend Ross Carney lived there, and so he told me all about it. He actually had a dresser that washed up on his beach after a hurricane, and it was marked Hygeia Hotel.
Wow.
So
cool.
I think we did an exhibit at the Hampton History Museum about the Old Point Comfort Resort. Okay. Yeah. So what else do you want?
Terrence has a question. First, he wants you to know how much he loves your birds in the background. He is a fellow birder, and Terrence, you will not believe John's decoy collection and art collection, but he has a question. In the overhead aerial view, the photo we showed earlier, John, he sees an almost Pentagon-looking complex that is surrounded by water. It doesn't appear to have a connection to the beach, but it may just not be apparent in this photo. Is this the military complex, and is there a moat around it? Yes.
Yes, that is the fort, the original fort. It was designed by by Bernard, who was an engineer, Simon Bernard, who was a brigadier general of the U.S. Engineers, but he also was a former aide-de-camp to Napoleon Bonaparte, so he was actually there at the Battle of Waterloo. So, he had to get jet work. So he is the guy that had the Coast Artillery Board after the War of 1812. And so this is the largest moat encircled stone fortification in North America. So how's that? Well, that. So it's not the Pentagon, it is Fort Monroe.
There you go.
Yeah.
And John can give a fabulous tour of Fort Monroe, any of you that
Yes.
are ever in the area. Terrence also asked, are the remnants of the Bayshore Resort still standing? Were the
No, they're not.
resorts ever desegregated?
No, it was never desegregated. It was torn down. I was a lifeguard down at Dog Beach on Fort Monroe, and I remember it being torn down in 1973, I believe, 73 or 74. I watched it being torn down. By that time, it was abandoned. And so what they did is they built a little community there, gated community, beach houses. We have some friends that live there. And so, yes, there's nothing left of Bayshore but memories. And those memories, of course, sadly, are fading.
Well, this was fantastic. Sherry did let you all know that you can watch it on YouTube in about a week from now and share it with friends that you think would like to know more about this and to visit our area. We did have a warm invitation extended from a resident of the Chamberlain to come and visit the Chamberlain and enjoy the view on the boardwalk there. And we can all speak to that live here.
Yes.
John's next Civil War lecture is July 23rd at noon. We will be talking about the CSS Arkansas. Quite another story full of big news from John that he will share.
Yes, it's a great story, a sad story because it's war, of course, but the ship was ill-fated, let's put it that way. And when I describe how it was built, you just won't believe that it really was as successful as it was.
And Terrence is asking, can we really still visit the Chamberlain? I do believe that you can have a tour of the Chamberlain. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I used to give tours.
Yes, you
of the
did.
Chamberlain when I lived there, and of Fort Monroe when I lived there. We actually sometimes had over 60 people. So that's all I could. That's the largest group I can take through Fort Monroe, by the way. And I'd rather have a group of 10, but yes, I think you have to come through the main entrance. Of course, you have to ring in. They'll and say, I'd just like to walk around in the lobby with its terrazzo floors and its elegant columns. Just the Beaux Arts exterior is just impressive, dynamic. The Chamberlain was once owned by the Nolan family. They also owned the hotel at Cape Charles, right? And so they welcomed one president, John F. Kennedy, before he was president. While he was running for president, he stayed in what was called the presidential suite. And so, yes, there's so many stories. I mean, I got to tell you, I could talk for hours about this topic, but I do believe that you could get a tour.
We do have a phone number, John.
Yes, okay.
And can I jump in here for a second, yes. John?
Absolutely.
The Chamberlain is now actually a retirement community for residents 55 and over. And as I was approaching that age, I actually went on a tour. So you can do a tour of the facility, but it is a prospective resident tour. But they were really good about pointing out a lot of the historical features of the hotel, and it's absolutely beautiful, particularly when they take you to the roof, to the room outside. It's like a garden room, and you can overlook everything you see in this photo. But yeah, so go check it out because it's beautiful.
My younger sister had her wedding reception in what was called the roof garden.
That's it. Yes.
And it was, of course, the current one is half its size,
right?
Or 1/3 of its size, but it was, like I got to tell you, their ballroom, which is now got up into apartments, was wonderful. They used to have an annual antique show there. That was just beyond compare. I actually have several things I bought or my mom bought for me during those antique shows. So I'm, as you could tell from what's behind me, I'm a rabid collector of paintings and maritime paintings, waterfowl paintings, decoys, oriental rugs, blah, blah, blah. You know, I acquired not too long ago, well, about a year ago, a bookcase that has the head of William Shakespeare carved looking out at you, you know.
Mhm.
And I put my official records of the Civil War in there, and it's like I'm as happy as I could be. So anyway, I live now in the 1757 Herbert House, so that's what you're seeing in the background.
Well, and John, Marcia asked, so you can drive through Fort Monroe, and yes, you can, since the fort was decommissioned. When was that, John?
Decommissioned in 2010, I believe,
Okay,
or 2011. I can't remember right now.
me either.
It's been so long ago. I was living in the Chamberlain when that happened, and fortunately for me, I have this crazy book, and they did a great job of restoring it. Cost $50 million. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. Blah blah blah. 2011 is when it was torn down. I mean,
Well,
when
and
the fort was closed.
Dr. DeRusi lives in the Chamberlain now, and she is letting us know that the solarium is available for event rental, and their fabulous legendary Sunday brunch is not open to the public yet. It's still for residents, but if you ever see that brunch is open for those of us that don't live there, check it out. It's momentous. So yes, thank you for that information. And it was 2011. Thank you as well. So with that, I hope we've caught all of your questions. I think we have. And thanks those of you that shared family history and that your grandparents got their honeymoon at the 1914 version of the Chamberlain, and others that shared family stories. Makes it all much better.
It's a fabulous story, and we just don't realize that the first tourist attraction in Virginia was actually the Old Point Comfort. White Sulphur Springs was actually founded in 1795, but in the early days, it was difficult to get to. You didn't have railroads to take you there. And in essence, the Old Point Comfort expanded rapidly because of beautiful white sanded beaches, but also because of transportation. Those steamships made the difference. The C&O Railway made the difference. So I love the beaches on Fort Monroe. As I said, I was a lifeguard there for 7 summers while I was in college, and like, wow, what can I say? But thank you all for attending today. I really appreciate it. It was in my opinion, is a wonderful story.
Absolutely.
And of course, I'm doing one in July on the CSS Arkansas. One of my most powerful stories is going to be delivered in August about Nat Turner's rebellion.
That's
And,
August 20th.
Yeah, and that is almost on the very date it occurred. It started on August 21 and ended by August 23, the largest slave revolt in American history. Actually, I'm restoring a house that will soon open as a museum known as the Rebecca Vaughn House, where the last enslaver was killed during the revolt. So anyway.
Well, we
like
thank
that.
you all so
Yes.
much for being with us. And John, thank you for another fantastic lecture.
Peace
And
and love.
watch it on YouTube and share it with your friends. Have a great weekend all, and see you next time. Thank you.